Cat on the assist.
Hey folks, how's the old quarantine going? Have you ever heard of the Walt Disney Company? I think you probably have. When it comes to the idols most worshipped by Americans, the mouse is right up there with the cross and the flag. Disney has a sort of sacred status that's unique among brands, most likely because of its slick ability to commoditize and market nostalgia. And nostalgia continues to sell as well as ever. Last year, Disney increased their total revenue by 17%, ending 2019 with a whopping $69.5 billion. But these insane earnings, as well as Disney's recent purchase of 21st Century Fox, have raised some uncomfortable questions. Why, for instance, should someone employed by a company that rich not make a living wage or have to live out of their car? Disney faced a similar reckoning after the release of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, its first feature-length film, in 1937. Snow White was a huge hit, and yet the artists who made the film come to life largely failed to benefit from its success. These grievances resulted in the 1941 Disney Animators strike, which forced the public to realize that Walt Disney didn't generate the magic of Disney single-handedly. Rather, he relied on an enormous team of talented animators, many of whom were never even named in the credits of the films they worked on. Revisiting the animators' strike sheds light on the dark side of our collective Disney veneration. When our perception of a powerful company is obscured by nostalgic fondness, what do we fail to see or recognize? My intention isn't to ruin anyone's childhood here. I just think that the artists who made the cartoons, characters, and experiences we love deserve to be remembered just as much as Walt Disney himself, who's definitely in no danger of being forgotten. Rumblings of an animators union began in the late 1920s and early 1930s, when animators at several studios began to form secret, union-like animators clubs. These clubs finally emerged out in the open as the Screen Cartoonists Guild, or SCG, in 1938, after a major unionization victory at Fleischer Studios, the studio behind Popeye the Sailor and Betty Boop cartoons. The SCG quickly negotiated contracts with several influential studios, but by 1941, they still had only 115 members total. Meanwhile, 800 animators still worked at Disney for cheaper, non-union wages. This made competing with Disney even harder than it already was for the smaller studios that had signed union contracts. The SCG realized that if their campaign was to survive at all, they would have to organize Disney. Fortunately for them, discontent was already brewing amongst many animators at the Disney Company. Before the release of Snow White, Walt Disney had promised his animators a cut of the film's profits in the form of pay raises and bonuses. These bonuses and raises failed to ever materialize, and Disney instead invested the film's profits largely into new company facilities in Burbank, California. Most of the perks of the new facilities, like bigger offices and exclusive company restaurants and gyms, only benefited a small handful of top employees. Working life didn't change all that much for the rank-and-file animators, many of whom had put in hours of unpaid overtime to finish Snow White. Some of them had even gone as far as to bring cots into work to sleep there while the film was in production. To make matters worse, when his next films, Pinocchio and Fantasia, didn't perform as well, Disney laid off many of the animators who were still waiting for their pay raises and bonuses from their work on Snow White. All of these grievances made Disney animators eager to join the Screen Cartoonists Guild, just as the union had hoped. Among them was a guy called Art Babbitt, who, despite being one of Disney's top-paid animators, empathized greatly with his lower-paid comrades. Babbitt was one of the delegates who met with Walt Disney in 1941 to try to get him to negotiate with the union. Disney angrily refused, and insisted that his employees were already represented by a union, the Federation of Screen Cartoonists. But the major problem with this was that the Federation of Screen Cartoonists was a fake or sham union that Disney had lawyers invent just to make his company look good. It wasn't a real union, and it wasn't at all independent from the company and its leaders. After this tense meeting, Disney fired Art Babbitt and 16 other union employees. In a show of solidarity, the remaining Disney animators officially went on strike on May 29, 1941. Each morning, hundreds of them picketed outside the Disney studio, and each morning, Walt Disney drove his car right through the crowd on his way in. The strike lasted about 5 weeks in total, and during this time, production was shut down on nearly all Disney animated features. Company profits also suffered from a nationwide Disney boycott. Eventually, mediators from the National Labor Relations Board forced Disney to sign a contract with the union. This included 50% pay raises for many of his animators. When the Disney animators finally went back to work on September 21, 1941, 90% of the cartoon industry's animators were now represented by the Screen Cartoonists Guild. But even in the wake of their victory, Walt Disney found plenty of ways to express his distaste for the union, including cutting union employees first whenever he made layoffs. Many of Disney's most prolific animators, including Art Babbitt, ended up leaving the studio within a few years anyway because the work environment remained so hostile for union employees. His experiences with the union and the strike may have also strengthened Disney's already fervent anti-communism. In 1947, Disney testified before the notorious House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, and he named several of the strike participants as communist agitators. This made it nearly impossible for some of them to continue working in the entertainment industry. Disney's testimony also delegitimized his strikers' grievances by portraying them as mindless dupes of some communist plot. To this day, Disney remains a not-so-happy place to work for many employees. In 2018, a survey sent out to low-wage Disneyland employees found that 75% of them can't pay their monthly expenses, and that 10% of them were homeless. A Disney spokesperson scorned this survey as politically motivated by labor unions, once again dismissing workers' grievances by accusing them of being political pawns. If we consider the context of the 1941 animators' strike, we can see that the present-day labor issues at Disney are as much of a company tradition as animated films featuring singing animals. Disney magic for consumers should not come at the expense of workers, especially when former Disney CEO Bob Iger made $47.5 million last year. The company has plenty of money to pay employees fairly. If you want to learn more about the efforts Disney employees are taking to fight for fair pay, I've linked several great sources below. Hey, thanks so much for watching my very first Little Labor Histories video. Please tell me what you thought and let me know if there's any other topics you would like me to cover. See you next week!